Hello and welcome to the Wednesday night Grumpy Sound Guy show. I am your host, Mr. J.R. Everhart, the Grumpy Sound Guy himself. Today in this video, we are going to go over an M32/X32 gain structure kind of layout. We're actually going to dive into the iPad and look at what that looks like on one of my scenes. Inside of Mixing Station. There'll be some conversation about Mixing Station as well, and how I have my Mixing Station thing kind of set up. So this is really kind of two videos in one, game structure and a little bit of basic 101 kind of layout for Mixing Station. This is not like a super deep, hardcore Mixing Station tutor, but a lot of you guys have kind of asked me how I have Mixing Station set up. So I'm going to use the opportunity today while we're going to be staring at it to just go ahead and show you guys what I got going on with that. And then we're going to have a whole conversation about gain structure inside the MX32 ecosystem. So stick around. You don't want to miss a second of today's show. Hey guys, I just want to take a quick opportunity to remind you to please subscribe to the channel. We've only got about 30% of you guys watching that are actually subscribed to the channel. Getting that subscription in there and hitting that notification bell really helps drive up the algorithms and helps get this content in front of more people who need to see this and can benefit from this kind of content. Also, if you are already a subscriber or you're just a fan of the Grumpy Sound Guy content, we now have a membership, a paid side to the YouTube channel here, where for about $5 a month, you can get in there and you can ask me questions. I even am shooting some guys over to my Facebook profile where we're getting on Messenger and kind of going back and forth one-on-one and chatting a little bit there. I will do that as long as my schedule allows for those kind of conversations. And right now we're doing pretty good. We're actually moving into the fall where I'm going to have more and more time to pour content into the member side there. If you look at the channel on the main page of the Grumpy Sound Guy channel, there's a row of icons there, or a row of selections like home, community, all that kind of stuff. If you scroll that to the left, you'll see a membership tab there. Hit that membership tab, and then that will open up the 3 packages that you can choose from. I mean, come on, guys. For about the price of a cup of coffee, you can be part of this inner circle of cool kids that, we get on there. We're going to do some live chats, as a group. I answer questions specifically, do videos specifically to your question in that side of the channel, again, as my schedule allows. So make sure you're taking advantage of that as well. We're also going to do some merch discounts at some point. We're kind of early on in the infant stages of the membership side, so we are constantly developing new and cool things for the member-only side of the channel. But if that's not your groove, that's totally cool. Thank you for coming. Thanks for watching. Just hit that subscription, tab. That is absolutely free. And get behind the Grumpy Sound Guy content. And I'm going to try to help you guys, make the world a better place. One mix at a time. Okay, so today's topic came from a follower, Chris Hughes, I think it was. We did a member-only video on one part of his his question and some of the issues he was having out of the PreSonus CDL12P. And we addressed all that in a video we posted yesterday on the member side. But the other side of his questioning was he was wanting to know what he needs to know, having come from the digital, or I mean, from the analog era of mixing and what is different and what he needs to know in the digital, world that we live in now. How gain structure has changed from analog to digital. And the short answer to that is you're not running near as much gain as you once were. In the analog days on old analog consoles, man, you could really hit the preamps and the channels hard. A lot of your channels would be blinking a little bit of a red light every now and then, because you were trying to hit the channel preamp that give you a lot of warmth, depth, and body by doing that. Analog consoles, as a rule, just kind of came out of the box with a lot of warmth and depth. So the more you hit those preamps with gain, the better it would sound. In the world of digital, it's the exact opposite, unless you're on a Pro Touring desk. Because a lot of the Pro Touring desks, like I know a lot of the Pro Series, Midas stuff, and the Avid stuff, they're basically using analog preamps in their stage box with just really good DA converters, digital to analog or analog to digital converters, to get it into the digital world, turn it all into like ones and zeros. So I've run those consoles, and they sound like analog consoles because they're using analog preamps at the stage. So in the middle market, we don't have that. We don't have, really cool, super fat analog preamps on the M32, the X32, or really, for that matter, anything else in that kind of price range, middle market price range. So you have to take a different approach to gain structure. And my rule is, I always kind of work backwards, and we're going to dive into the iPad here in just a minute, and I'm going to show you this. We kind of work backwards in the sense that we put left, right, out at unity at 0, and then come back to the channel and then start adjusting our gain. Now, that left, right, out can sometimes, where you leave that fader, can sometimes really depend on the system that you're using. So if you have a front of house system, because gain structure goes beyond the console, it goes through the processor, it goes to the amps. There's gain staging at every part of that system. So if you have a system that has a monster amount of overhead, I was just talking to someone the other day who said they were, actually a buddy of mine here local was telling me he was on an event and he was running his left, right, out at like, negative 30 dBu because he had so much headroom at the amp rack, and with the speakers that he was using, they were so efficient that he just didn't need to push that a lot. So there's a part of this where you have to kind of just feel out your system and how that works. In my world, on my rigs, I usually am running unity because I'm not running the signal near as hot at the channel. See, again, this is opposite mindset from what we had when we were in analog days, where in analog days, I would set all the faders at 0 and then, hit the input gain until I was, at least full into the yellow and maybe even touching a red every now and then. And what you got to understand about that clip light, especially on analog consoles, and it's the same on digital too, because I think they designed them both the same, is that light comes on 5 dB before distortion. So it's a warning. When you hit that light, if it blinks just every now and then, my rule was if it stays on longer than 2 seconds, 3 seconds, something like that, then I'm going to turn the gain down a little bit on that channel. In the world of digital, you don't ever want to see any red lights, ever, anywhere. I will occasionally, have something that's peaking like a snare drum or a vocalist that really got warmed up and they're really hammering into the mic. I will occasionally get a red light here or there. Nothing that's audibly clipping, but at the same time, I will usually go to that channel and maybe back off the compression, which raises the gain, and turn down the input gain on that channel to, keep that down into the yellow more. The way the meters work on these consoles is it's green, yellow, and then you got a red light. So that's kind of what is going on with that. Let's go ahead and jump over onto the iPad, and I'm going to just give you a hands-on look at how all that kind of looks in my mixing philosophy and in my setup. So stick around. Okay, so here we are at the iPad. I am using a iPad Pro because I'm old and blind and really like having the bigger screen. But I will tell you, that thing does tend to get a little heavy if you're standing and holding it in your hands for a long period of time. So, you know, try to put that into context with your carpal tunnel issues. I typically try to find a table and put it on a stand, just like you see it here right now. We are looking at Mixing Station. This is a scene that I have saved inside of Mixing Station. We are not connected to the M32 at this stage of the game, but this is a scene that's very representative of a normal, you know, show for us. So let me just start off with just giving you like the 50-cent tour through my Mixing Station setup. So when you purchase Mixing Station, this section here is pretty much the same, just right out of the box when you download the app. But the thing about Mixing Station is all this is completely customizable. So this section over here is my custom workflow kind of stuff. I really didn't feel the need to get crazy with all this because I'm trying to work smarter and not harder. I'm trying to keep things simple and easy to navigate. This little bar here that navigates through the different layers and stuff is, you know, pretty much the same. It comes, you know, right out of the box with this. It's usually up here. I moved it down here because that just seems to be where my thumb is most. So yeah, so that's kind of what's up with that. Some guys will put like this whole dynamic section here, you know, in their setup. One of my crew guys, that's how he does his Mixing Station. And that's cool. There's no wrong way to do it, man. It's really just whatever you like, whatever, you know, trips your trigger, man, and whatever, you know, gives you, you know, the things that you're looking for from the workflow. I just tend to like this workflow because this channel layout and everything just kind of feels more like it is on the console itself. I have three M32C DL32 stage box setups, and I have one M32 console, full-size console, and then I also have an X32 rack with an S32 stage box that I am currently setting up just to kind of take out on like Talking Heads gigs and acoustic duos and, you know, smaller stuff or whatever. But, you know, I don't see the sense in buying DL16s when, you know, DL32s are available. I like all my stuff to be 32 channel, and really is because this channel layout can be the same on every single mixer. So there's 1 through 16, there is, you know, 17 through 32. So that way, every time I fire up one of my consoles, this is the layout that I see. It doesn't change, and it makes everything super fluid and trying to get through sound check in a quick and efficient manner and all that kind of stuff. So let's just kind of go through my little custom section here. Each one of these tabs are Senzone fader for monitors. So we have 6 wedge monitor kind of setups here. Right out of the box, if you go to the effects thing, M32 and X32 give you, they usually already have these EQs assigned to these effects, slots. I'm using a vocal verb, a plate for drums, and then I believe this is the long delay, and this is a short delay, and then the rest of them are broke up into two channel third octave EQs. So this will be mix 1 and 2 for monitors, mix 3 and 4, 5 and 6, and then this is stereo front of house, you know, is how that usually works. Or no, wait, I got it backwards. This is stereo front of house, and then this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So yeah, I don't look at this screen very often, so I set this up what feels like 10 years ago, and it has just completely worked, man. It just has always worked. It was probably, I don't know, I set this kind of thing up, I don't know, I'm going to say at least 5, 6 years ago, 7 years ago. And I do about 180 shows a year. So, you know, we get we have really, tried to make this thing as streamlined as it can be. This line of tabs next to the send zone fader are just quick view to the monitor EQs. That's a wedge monitor EQ. That's typically what a wedge EQ looks like. There's mix 2, mix 3, mix 4. 4 is usually drums, depending on where we're at. Sometimes 5 is drums. If we're on a festival, we'll push 5 back to drums. And then 6 is usually a floater that we use mid-stage. It doesn't have near as much stuff carved out of it because we rarely use it. And then I have 2 ear, which would be mixes 7 and 8 coming out of the M32 for ears. So if I got an artist who wants wedges, or we're at a festival where we're all wedges and already set up with wedges, and say a lead vocalist and a drummer want to use their ears for that event, I always try to accommodate that. I never give guys a problem when they want to use ears. I also run a 32 channel split snake on all those big festivals. That way, if a band shows up and they're all inclusive with ears, then I can just give them my tail to their mixer, and that's just kind of business as usual for them, and in which case they would have this wedge setup on top of their ear setup. But honestly, most of the time, if they come in like that, they're asking me to just mute my wedge monitors. They're just so used to using their ears. That's the way that is. So on these ear mixes, the only EQ you're going to have on that, so if you go over here, here's the 6 wedge mixes, here's the 2 ear mixes. So on this, the only EQ you're going to have is this parametric, which I have turned off at this stage of the game. Most of the time, there's some in-ear tricks that I do. Like if I turn it on, I'll probably do something like this. Here's a trick that I learned on the road. If you start at where are we at here? Like 150, and I know you guys are losing your mind already. And that ear mix, like, dude, you're cutting out that much bottom, man. Well, if you're a drummer, I wouldn't do that, or a bass player. But if you're a guitar player, keyboard player, vocalist, maybe you're in the horn section, and you're using ears, I start here with a lot of the ear mixes, and if they complain that it's a little tinny for them or they'd like a little more low end response, I will slowly start bringing this down until they're happy. Because here's the thing about in-ear monitors, all those in-ear monitor units have compression built into the units themselves as sort of a fail-safe. You have no control over those compression settings. It's just part of the manufacturer's protocol in their in-ear monitoring systems. Nothing activates and really gets that compressor moving more than low end. So what might sound a little tinny or a little mid-rangey during sound check will probably sound great once you get front of house low end rumbling and all that kind of stuff to the people with these ears. And this will clean up their ear mix substantially. And they will just rave about how they can hear themselves so much better now, because number one, you're not mudding up their mix with a bunch of this low end, especially vocalists. That's really what this is mostly geared toward. Vocalists, because they don't need a bunch of bottom end in their ears. Nothing musical vocally under 150 hertz, so it cleans up all that mud and really gives, now you're not hammering against that compressor with all this low end, and stuff like that. So that's a little trick that we use in the world of in-ear monitors. So again, that ear mix only has let me turn the EQ on that one too now. Only has that parametric EQ. It doesn't have a third octave like these wedge mixes do. And some of you guys are probably losing your mind, especially some of you novice guys, about how carved out these EQs are. But dude, when you're trying to get volume, out of your wedges, you have no choice but to carve that out. I do not use parametric EQs on wedge mixes. As you can see, it's off. I do not do that, and I do not compress those wedge mixes because I am using the compression at the channels to do that sort of thing. So that's kind of that layout there. And then I have a quick tab for the front of house EQ. That's typically what my front of house EQ is. I'm mostly mixing on a JBL SRX 700 series passive rig. And this is what we jokingly call inside of CLP Audio EQing the JBL out of the JBL boxes. So those are EQ settings that I typically use every time I unpack the JBL rig, and it's just correcting for the system. JBL can be a little harsh and a little tinny, and then 160 hertz or whatever is always kind of a wonky frequency. I find that that's a resonating frequency in a lot of indoor places. So I kind of just start there. Obviously, I may change that a little bit throughout the show, but I am a guy who firmly believes in getting the EQs right at the channel. So as you can see, there's a lot of EQing going on, on these vocal channels. We're probably rolled off at around 150 hertz or something. Again, that may sound a little thin during sound check when you're just listening to the vocal, but when you get it into context of the program, it's going to be just fine. These are a little hot for what I usually use. I don't know what, yeah, okay. So, so there's that. Mute all basically is a hold. I have it set up as a hold so you can't accidentally just touch it and mute everything, because this mutes all the channels except for, let me get it to do what it's supposed to do here. Oh, for some reason it's not working. Maybe because we don't have it connected to the mixer. But that mutes everything but the talkback and the left-right playback. So that's kind of what that is. I rarely ever use a talkback, just because I'm not usually far enough away from the stage for it to be all that. But yeah, so then here is the effects mute, which, oh, there we go. Now that's working. There we go. Maybe we can get this to do that again. Maybe it takes a second. It does not. So I'm not used to looking at this not connected to the mixer, but trust me, that's what that does. Mute enable gives you the ability to mute or unmute individual channels. I keep it on so I can unmute, individual channels. That's cool how it's blinking there. That's a new thing. It's really weird how this app responds when you're not connected to the actual console. So then down here is the short delay that I have layered with the reverb here as a return on one of the DCAs. I also have a Senzone fader for the long delay. Usually only run that on the lead vocalist. And I have a quick tab for the long delay unit itself, so I can adjust anything I need to adjust in there in the long delay unit itself. This is a tap for the long delay. That's a tap for the short delay. And long delay returns here. Drum plate reverb returns here. And then vocal verb and that short delay come back together here. And then at the vocal channels, if you go up here, there is my vocal verb and my short delay. I keep the short delay just a little bit underneath that verb because I really want more verb than I want short delay in the return. And that's just set per channel that way. Basically just on the vocals because it's a vocal effects setup. So there. That is my custom layout for, for mixing station. As far as channel layout, I think it's pretty straight ahead for anybody who came out of analog. I'm kind of an old school guy this way. I had somebody argue with me online not long ago that putting drums first in the mix was a boomer thing, even though I'm Gen X. I didn't take offense to it, but everybody does things their way. They do vocals first and guitars and keyboards and want all that on the top layer. I am always going to have drums first because it just is what it is. And their argument was drums are kind of set it and forget it. Once you get drums dialed in, then, they don't want to hop back and forth between the layers to get to the vocals and that sort of thing. But I have drums, drum pad, like a rolling pad or something, bass, 2 channels of acoustic, 2 channels of electric, and then 2 channels of keyboard, top and bottom keyboard. Most time they're running mono, or if they're running stereo, I'll link them together. Do I have them linked here? No, I don't. I will link them together and let that be that. If I need more stereo keys, then I usually go over here and rob these horn channels if they don't have a horn section, or just fit them in someplace. I have a band in here that is linked together. That's funny how they don't move together when you're not connected to the console. But yeah, that's a band in. So like sometimes I'll have a band show up and they'll want to run their own mixer, their own mics, stands, cables, DIs, they're all inclusive. So I just bring them right into those two channels there. They are linked together. I got the input gain at like 0 unity and let it be whatever it is, and that puts them in my rig. Most of the time those guys are stereo. I have an aux fed system, so when they come in here, then I can come over here and adjust the sub with their system and, you know, make them happy however they want to be with kick and, you know, the low end response of their rig. Also use that if I'm in a corporate event and there's a DJ on site. I can use that band in for a DJ, so that works really well. The first 6 channels are vocals, and then we have 4 channels of horns. We have an open channel, talkback, and then my playback left and right. And that's just kind of my 32 channel setup. It works for me. I'm used to it. I like it, you know, and that is kind of how it gets done. So now, gain structure. Like I was saying before, I'll start here. So these are the final output gains for left, right, and for sub. We are aux fed sub. The cool thing about the M and X32 is it comes right out of the gate with your mono out being your sub. So you're not actually eating up a mix bus over here somewhere or something. And, you know, it just kind of streamlines that. So I start there, and then this is basically where I was at the last time I used this scene. You know, so I'm using a Beta 52 kick mic, and my gain is at plus 13.5 dB or at about 10 o'clock, you know, and then my output fader was like -5. That's really a little hot. Sometimes it's usually here because my system's a little hotter. This drummer may have had a light hitting foot, and that's why I was trying to push it. That's something that, as a drummer, I never understood about drummers, because I'm kind of a concrete truck behind a drum kit. You know, I'm 6'2", got a size 15 foot. You know what I mean? Like, I put my foot into the kick, you know, and then I got some of these guys, they do sound check and they're hammering down on the kick. And then when they start playing with the band, they're barely touching the beater against the head of the kick drum. So in that case, I have to, you know, push this up some more and then probably go over here to the gate and open the gate some more, you know, or something like that to, you know, get the kick where I want it in. And then like I recently had somebody at a festival who had, you know, a light foot, and I just had to, you know, surrender myself to the idea that I'm not going to get the kick where I want it, and I'm not going to, you know, stress out the system trying to get it there, because he would occasionally hit the kick hard, like in the final note of a song or in a very distinct part of a bridge of a song or something. And if you got this, you know, kicked up to here or something to try and get his kick during the verses and choruses, and then he hits that other thing, well, now you're blasting your subs out into left field somewhere. So there comes a point where you got to just say, you know what, dude, it is what it is. I run some modest compression on here. This is just a general start, by the way, on a lot of, especially compression. Compression is just generally a start place here. I dial all this in per player, per band, all that kind of stuff as we're going through sound check. So I like to compress at least about, I don't know, I'm making up 8 dB, you know, there. So I like to compress at least 8 dB here, you know, or even 10 dB there. I like my attack at 30 milliseconds. That brings things right where you want it to be. My hold is at 43, and then the release is at 128 milliseconds. That's kind of I usually, like on vocals, I think I'm 151, and this is probably 10. But then that attack is the same. That attack is the same on almost all my compressors, because if you have that attack super fast and the compressor wants to breathe a little bit, and you'll hear it'll get kind of wonky, you know, you'll hear that in the mix. So that's not the way I do it. So this is kind of my gain structure for the kick channel. And then the kick is going to be peaking probably right around unity, or something like that. I usually try to run most of these channels just into the yellow for a dot or two, and then I'm happy. Now, in analog days, we would run the kick way up into the yellow and really try to saturate that preamp with some gain to kind of fatten it up. And then all these things would have been outboard units. So you would have had a gate outboard unit. You would have had a channel EQ, which would have been a 4-band EQ. Typically, we would insert a 31-band, graphic EQ on the kick to get it exactly where we want it. And so that would be another outboard unit. And then the compressor would be an outboard unit. Later on, like in the 90s, we got a lot of units that had gates and compressors in the same units. Like I know DBX had that. So this being different from analog, we never want to see any red lights. We just don't, we always want, everything to be, peaking at like the second to the last yellow light or something like that or whatever. Bass guitar can sometimes be all over the place. This is just whatever it was the last time I had it out. This is not something I would typically do. So that bass player probably had some kind of weird fret noise or something going on around 2K is why I had that cut. A lot of bass players that I work with just don't have, it's like I find there's two camps of bass players. Like there's either guys who have really thick bottom end, which I would not need that boost, and they have no tone, or they're all tone and have no low end, at least to my taste. I run into that more than I do the earlier. I run into guys that have actually decent tone, but then don't have enough bottom end. And the little trick that I use beside this is the beauty of being aux-fed sub, is I'll turn my sub off and I'll dial in my tone of the bass guitar here and get it where I want it in the tops. Then I will start bringing in the sub until I get the low end of the bass where I want it. Bam, then you're butter. Now you got a bass guitar that's in the mix. You can hear every note that he plays all over the neck, whether he's up high register or whether he's in the lower register. You can hear every note that he's playing. So that is definitely that. Gain structure on bass can be radically different from one bass player to another. I get guys that show up with like fractal pedals or something like that, and they're direct, or they're just using a J48 or something, radial DI with a tuner and maybe a Sans amp or something like that, and they'll come in and they'll be super hot, and I'm like down here, somewhere like that or something, and the fader is here, the channel. This is the same representation as this, by the way. When you open this up, that's the same thing as what you see when you're looking at the channel view, or the mixer view. So, and then I got other guys that show up with a bass amp that maybe doesn't have much of an output, or they don't have their pedal board set up right, and I might find my gain being way up here like this. It is just radically different from one player to the next. I typically start at 0, in the input gain, and then kind of just see where we are, get the level right on the meter, and then start honking on the EQ and the aux sub like I was just showing you. Guitars are the same way. If they're using like a Line 6 Helix or something like that, then, this may be much lower. This is a input gain for a 609 Sennheiser guitar mic. I would probably, maybe that would be pretty close to like an SM57 too. An SM57 might be a little hotter on the input gain there. As you can see, I don't do a whole lot with guitars. Even this 3K, I'll give you a little tip here. If you get a guitar that's kind of muddy, give it a little bit of 3K, 3.5 there or whatever, and that'll brighten it right up and get it cutting right through the mix. I typically have something like this going on the bottom end, depending on the style of music. Like if it's a metal band, they always have a lot of low end in their guitar sound. So I make sure I have this somewhere where it's not, destroying my speakers, because metal bands don't know how to act. And you're actually still getting that low end crunch that they're going for. Most of the bands that I mix are typically top 40 dance bands, 90s rock bands, all that kind of stuff. You know what I mean? So I don't really need to cut this much. Country bands don't really need to cut this much unless there's something wonky going on. I usually roll off all the guitars around 75 or 80 hertz because there's just nothing musical underneath of that. And then with the acoustic guitars, the same way, kind of the same approach. I find a lot of acoustics are muddy on the bottom end, so I'm just kind of pulling this down, trying to clean it up a little bit. Like country guys really like this, 250 to, 800 range in their acoustic, which to me always sounds boxy and muddy, but that's how those guys fly. To where you take a rock and roll guy that's using an acoustic, he typically wants a little more brighter response and probably has his guitar set up that way. If you listen to some of my acoustic favorites would be like James Taylor and stuff like that. Their acoustics did not have all that mud going on, Again, that's at 75 hertz. I'll roll off kind of like 75 hertz. The only guy I've ever not done that for was Kip Winger. I did an acoustic show with Kip Winger one time, and he was using the sub frequencies with the butt of his hand. He would hit the guitar to make it sound like a kick drum, and his technique was so extremely dialed in that it was just never a problem. He really knew how to control that bottom end and not let it be an issue. Another thing that you'll run into with acoustics is if they don't have a resonant cover, I always call it a hockey puck because it looks like a hockey puck to me. You'll find that you'll get something around 250 or 300 if you're in wedge monitors that will try to feed back. So these are just start places. All that plays a role in gain structure because when you move EQ frequencies up and down, that changes the gain to a certain degree. Keyboards is usually just super flat. Don't really do much with them. Keyboard manufacturers go out of their way to make sure that those things are pretty correct right out of the box. The gain can radically change from one keyboard to the next, from one patch on the keyboard to the next. That's something you hear me hound about on this channel all the time. And then we get over to vocals. And, here's kind of like my JBL system start point for vocals, depending on the vocalist, depending on, whether they're an alto or a soprano or if they're a tenor or baritone vocalist will greatly change these things. None of this is in concrete. Again, this is just a start point. Let's look at their gain. Their gain is usually, I'm using UR4D Shure Wireless, which really has a hot response with SE Electronics V7 capsules. And, those things get it done, dude. They have a lot of gain. So I am at plus 10 on the input gain and usually end up somewhere around negative 10 on the channel. Now, if I have a whisper singer, that may go up to unity. That may go up to, negative 3 or 4 or something. Excuse me. And that also depends on how hard I'm compressing them. Again, this is a start point. I'm usually in this ballpark with compression, and I'm getting about 6 dB of compression. I, right out of the gate, start with a 4 dB makeup gain on the compressor. We're at like 28, 30, milliseconds on the attack. I run 7-to-1 ratio on all the vocals on the X and M32s. That's just where I feel like that the compressor is giving me what I want on the M and X32s. When I'm on other consoles, I use different threshold settings because each console is kind of different in how they process compression. So I'm 7-to-1 on the channel, and then if you go over here, I have a vocal subgroup just for compression. I am 4-to-1 here, 30 millisecond. I'm doing no makeup gain, and I'm basically just trying to get into that 3 or 4 dB compression thing. This kind of blends all of the backing vocals together and really makes the vocal group sound like they're singing a chord. I have a guitar group there, but when I originally set this up, M and X32 would only let you do these in pairs. Now, you know, like 3 updates later or whatever, now you can do them individually, and I just never went back and changed it. I rarely do anything with that guitar group. As you can see, I don't do any parallel compression, you know, with drums or anything like that. Not that I don't believe in that, and not that I don't think that that's beneficial, because I know it is, but because I just don't feel the need of inserting one more layer of stuff that I have to do when everyone is super happy with what I have. This drum top and sub that you see going on here is something that I would run if I'm doing a big show, like with a national. I will run a drum top and a drum sub, and then I'll use these 6 wedge mixes for the rest of the band. So that'll give me actually 7 mixes on stage and 2 ear mixes, you know. So yeah, I rarely ever use that drum top and sub. Usually we can get away with 5 mixes on stage and everybody's happy. So that's kind of that. When you get the final out, my compression ratio is 2.5 to 1, no makeup, and again, 30 milliseconds of attack. And it's pretty straight ahead. I am running this. I have no processing on the mid-high speakers on my system, like in terms of like a drive rack processor. I just do it here. I just kind of cut things at, where we at here? This is 70 something. That's a little high, really. I usually roll this down to about 50 or 60 hertz. So it's cutting everything under 50 or 60 hertz out of the rig and the tops because we run a drum sub. And then here's the sub. I have an analog crossover in the amp rack for the aux sub that is cut at like, 65 hertz, somewhere in that ballpark. And then I just had one of my guys calling me out on this. He's like, this doesn't make any sense with your left-right. And I'm like, well, it's because we have a crossover in the amp rack. I really don't even need all this because of the crossover. But, yeah, that's kind of where we are, with that. I like to push 50 hertz just a teeny tiny bit. That's really not much of a gain. I mean, that says 5 dB, so I'm at like 3 or 4 dB of 50 hertz there. I just like how 50 punches the kick in your chest. So that's kind of how we run, left, right, out. That's what the gain structure looks like, on our console. Again, usually here, let me go back. Usually here, this is like barely touching the first yellow, tab on the meter. Same deal over here with the kick. It's, maybe peaking at the first yellow. We have a lot of headroom in our system, and we just make it happen at the channels. I never go to the house EQ. This is a mistake I see a lot of guys making. I never go to the house EQ to correct for, feedback in the house or anything like that. I always try to find those things at the channel, find out which channel's feeding back, find that frequency, and cut it here first before you go anyplace else. That's a nice thing about having this subgroup. If I'm finding a resonant frequency in the room, I'll come here and cut that in all the vocal mics, at one time. And then that'll kind of get you where you're going. That way, if you make a change here, you're changing the entire band. That's your front of house EQ. You don't want to do that. You want to let your mix be organic and dynamic and, have fidelity. And I just don't like to honk on the house EQ when I can make it work at the channels. And then obviously if it's a monitor issue, you're feeding back in a monitor, you go to these EQs here, in your monitor rig, and you find it there and cut it. And I mean, the modern digital consoles all have RTAs. There'll be little blue lines here going up and down. And the one that's feeding back is going to go woo like that. And you just go boom. Feedback's going, that's kind of how you figure that kind of stuff out. I hope this kind of makes sense. Let's go ahead and turn the camera back around and close this video out and send you on your way. Okay, and we're back. We're back. So there was a whole bunch of information, a whole bunch of it that you probably didn't even need. But you might find it valuable. I've done other videos in the past. If you go back through the video archive, you'll find me going through mixing station and how I set up a mix and all that kind of stuff. I think I did an art of mixing series. It might have been 1 or 2 or 3 parts or something about 8 months ago or something like that. Go back and look through that and you'll hear some of that same stuff that I was just saying there in that video. We didn't necessarily talk specifically about game structure, but you know, in those other videos like we did today. But you know, really I mean, look guys, I can sit here and be like the spec police and spec you to death on, you know, what the Yamaha Sound Reinforcement Handbook says about game structure. I would just suggest you go buy that book and keep it in your inventory because it's a handy thing to have around. But on this channel, I really try to go out of my way to give you guys real world, easy to understand application of the questions that you have for me. You know, so that's why we didn't get into all the technicality of game structure. Most of you guys should really understand those principles right out of the gate. You know, the biggest difference between how we mixed in analog days and how we mix now is we don't saturate those channel preamps like we used to. And we never want to see red anywhere on the mixer, you know? So yeah, that's basically the whole thing in a nutshell. I can give you 1,000 reasons why that's the case, but that's just going to bore you to death and you're going to tune out. But that is the long and short of it. Now, in having, and I'm going to end with this because the video is already long as hell. Really understanding game structure, and I mentioned this early in the video, has as much to do with your relationship between the mixer, your power source, whether that is an amp rack or you got amp farm going on, or they're active speakers and you have power amps in the speakers. There is a relationship between the mixer and that, and the final transducers, the speakers themselves, and how they're going to react. There's a relationship in all three of those things that need to be considered. Even with your crossover or with your drive rack or whatever you're using there, because you have input and output gains and all that kind of stuff as well. I think on my aux-fed crossover, I'm pretty sure I'm set at unity input and output on that. I'm not really trying to make up for anything, you know. The input sensitivity on your amplifiers is another thing. If you're running outboard amplifiers like I am, because all my stuff is passive for the most part, you know, that needs to be considered. You know what I'm saying? That needs to be, you know, part of the equation, because you don't want to be running your mixer to death trying to get where you want to be, you know, with your final output in front of house. You know, you want to have the rest of the system dialed in correctly. That input sensitivity on those amps need to match all across your front of house. You know, I do it across the whole rig, monitors and everything. All my input sensitivity is set at 36 dBu. So all my front of house amps, all my monitor amps are all at 30. I think I might have one monitor amp that's Chinese that's like 35 dBu instead of 36. And I'm not convinced it's 35, it's probably 32 or something, as it doesn't sound like it's reacting that way. I've been meaning to get in there and actually turn it up to the next setting, but a lot of amps are preset that way, like a lot of the QSC PLX amps. I think they're all preset at like 32 or 36 dBu. I forget, it's been a minute since I've had those amps. I used to have a bunch of them. I don't have hardly any of them anymore. I think I have some in the mid-high section of my 850 rig that sits in a rack and a trailer just in storage. But other than that, we're using Crown Macro I power for the most part, which is basically an iTech amp without the DSP. You know, so it's selectable on those amps. You know, that input sensitivity, you know, there's a relationship between input and output, you know, gain on those amplifiers. And if you don't have that right, your amp's going to be working against you and you're not going to be getting maximum output, you know, in the system. Or if you have a Frankenstein thrown together rig, and you're using 4 different brands of amplifiers, if they're all not input matched, that's going to cause you some problems, you know. So it'll work, but it's not going to have that impact and that overall punch that you really want out of your system, or the clarity that you're really, you know, shooting for in your system. Because when you have amps with different input sensitivity, it creates all kinds of little weird honky things going on. You know, the system kind of gets honky, you know, like mid-rangey honky. Yeah, So that stuff's just as important as our whole conversation about, gain staging and gain structure inside the mixer. I try to just find a nice medium across the entire system from the instrument, and the gain that they're giving me, to how I'm addressing gain on the console, to how I'm addressing gain in my processing, to how I'm addressing gain in my amp racks, to how I am delivering gain and power to the speakers, the transducers themselves, and getting all those different layers of things correct is really what separates the men from the boys in this business. Now, a lot of the active stuff is done all that homework for you. You just plug in an XLR into the back of it, and it did all the amp rack, final output, math for you. You just got to get gain staging right in the mixer. So there's something to be said for that. I said just the other day, I think in one of the short form videos that, or maybe I recorded it and haven't posted it yet, but I was talking with one of my crew members this past weekend at our gig and was saying, the only downside about digital, well, there's a bunch of downsides, but the biggest downside that I see as a production company owner is a lot of the active boxes have made a lot of this stuff idiot proof, to where I came up in a world during the analog days where you had to just know all this stuff. You just did, man. You had to know how to, set all these different levels of gain staging. You had outboard units that all had input and output gain on them. All your compressors had that. A lot of your effects units had that. You had to understand gain staging even, 1,000 times more than what you do today. Nowadays, a guy will pay somebody like me to come out and put a start scene in their mixer, buy all active powered boxes, and they actually got a decent sounding little rig. And then they're out there competing against me with my start scene, cutting my throat, stealing work from me. Those guys don't bite at my ankles too awful much. I'm pretty well established, but I always think it's funny to see these guys posting online and people are raving about how great of a sound guy they are and how fat their mix is, and they're mixing on my scene, But I digress. That's a whole nother conversation altogether. I hope this helped you guys out. I hope you really enjoyed the content today. There's a lot of information in this video. You really should go back and watch this multiple times. You really should stop the video, take some notes, maybe break out your X or M32 and make whatever adjustments you need to make there, and at least try the stuff that I have recommended and shown you that I do in my system, and see if it works. Depending on how your final output side of your system is set up, this should be pretty turnkey, and should get you right in the ballpark of where you want to be. We've got a lot of positive feedback from these kind of videos of guys who have done that and found that this just works, and it really has solved a lot of problems from them. So thanks. Subscribe to the channel. Again, please subscribe. It costs absolutely nothing to subscribe. And if you want to be super cool and get in the inner circle, be sure to join and become a member of the channel. Again, go to the Grumpy Sound Guy YouTube homepage, and there is a line of tabs like home, community, video, support. If you scroll that to the left, then the membership tab will come out. You can hit that, and that's how you join the channel. So love you guys. I'll see you next week.